Mr. Warren, your organization does great work. This message of stay, how do you go about delivering the message, and can it be replicated? So start off by telling us what you do.
Okay. Well, I think, as I kind of alluded to at the start, I mean, our whole strategy is really focused on this notion of helping fathers have a more holistic view of what their role actually is. And I think, candidly, just going back to this marriageability argument, I mean, I'm newer to this game probably than many, but, when I first started doing this work, I heard that word. I'd never heard it before. I don't know if other, normal people ever use that word at all. So what is it? And when I got the definition of what it was all defined around economics. So a guy is marriageable if he's got a certain economic capability. That doesn't make a guy marriageable. I mean, if that was the case, then professional athletes would be the best husbands in the world. I mean, you laugh because they've got the economic piece, but it's the culture that many of them come from that doesn't lead to that. So I think so marriageability, in my view, has to be defined to be a much broader word that includes the kinds of things that we're talking about, skills around relationship skills, communication skills, parenting skills. That's what marriageability is about, not just the ability to bring a check. And I think as long as we continue to talk about this issue in that context, it will continue to tell a guy, particularly a guy who's unemployed or underemployed, you have no role here. And so part of my strategy has been, look, you got to talk about what good fathers do in a much broader sense. They do three things. They provide, they nurture, and they guide. Provide, nurture, and guide. Guys get the whole provide stuff. That the culture's wired around it. It's communicated in every single place you find it. Guys get that, whether they have jobs or not. And I think a lot of guys who kind of go underground and don't engage on the parenting side, it's because we have a whole culture that tells them that if you don't provide, then you bring nothing to the table but that, so therefore you have no reason to be involved, and it's easy to see you're replaceable. But if you broaden I mean, not even broaden, it's what real good fathers will do. They nurture. It's about connecting heart to heart, having those skills that you need in order to be a good, effective parent. And if you guide, which is about instilling values in your kids that are in the best interest of your kids and in the best interest of society at large. So even if you're unemployed or underemployed, you still have the ability to do those other things. And to the degree that you do those, those are the things that affect the outcomes of a kid. I grew up without a dad. I don't know if he paid child support or not, but I know he wasn't at my football games. I know he wasn't at this. I know he wasn't at that. That's the stuff that got me to leave the lucrative world of Goldman Sachs for the lucrative world of nonprofit management, dealing with that issue. All right? So, so I think that's part of the problem that we have. I just want to make one other point. And I don't know where this sits in terms of this whole debate, but guys are pretty concrete creatures. I mean, we just are. We like stuff to be defined and laid out. And I think one of the challenges that we have, and I think that comes with this whole notion about marriage and relationships, part of the problem is that there's not a definition of what that is. Like, I'm here in Washington now, and I'm not a Washington person, but so everybody's talking about healthy relationships versus healthy marriage. Well, what is that, healthy relationship? I don't even know what that means. What does that actually mean? Now, if you tell me a healthy marriage, there's a whole script. Because if I have a healthy relationship, well, does that mean I sleep with other women or not? If I have a healthy relationship. Well, does that mean I should maybe take a lesser job so that you can move forward in your career? Does that mean I save towards your retirement? Does that mean I should care about what your parents think about me? Does that mean I should raise my kids? I have no idea. But these are all questions that anybody who has sex with somebody else has to answer at some point if a child comes out of that process. So words mean stuff, and I think part of the reason we're seeing this erosion, this uproar, it's not defined. It's not defined in a way that people can get their arms around it, and I think, honestly, that's the biggest problem around the marriage thing. And going back to this whole notion about, labor with opportunities, I get that. I go back to the Kunta Kinte thing. I'm like, what was the opportunity that he saw? I mean, just think about that. But he knew what a script was in terms of what it meant to be married. It was defined. And it was those seeds that were planted then that gave us this reality. And that's why I'm very focused on that, because that's very doable. And I'll say this one last point. My mother, my mother was a teen mom, and they got, they were married and they got divorced very early on in the process. But one of the powerful things that my mother did which I didn't even realize was even happening until much later in life, is that she never denigrated the institution of marriage, even though it didn't happen for her. She instilled in me the importance of that. So when I got my girlfriend pregnant, right? I'm not sure how at this point. I'm still working on that whole piece, but allegedly it took place. I love my wife. We've been married for 30 years. Been married for 30 years. When I got her pregnant, in my script was this whole notion of marriage, because my mother instilled that in me. So people get all twisted because it's like, well, I'm not married, so why? Kids sit in a chair and across them is somebody or nobody, but who communicates a set of values. So even if marriage hasn't worked out for you and it's not your kid still is going to have to make a decision about this. And I haven't met anyone yet, and like I said, mine was a single mom. I haven't met anyone yet who said, you know, my hope and my dream for my daughter is that she will be a single mother. In fact, every shiftless guy that I meet, I introduce him to her in hopes he will get her pregnant and leave her. I'm just saying, I have not met are you here? Because so if that's not what we want, then we need to be communicating that, yes, okay, yes, your dad and I were not married. Understand it. But let me tell you about this institution and what that means. I don't want you, you know, and so you see a young boy that goes through that process, and this is that, when I talk to a single mom, I say, okay, what kind of father is he going to be? Well, first off, most of the time, folk haven't even thought about it. Nobody ever talked to me 1 minute about what kind of father I was going to be.
Okay, hold that thought.
All right, I'll keep talking because you don't. All right, I'm done.
Ms. McDonald, your discussion of, well, the linkage between the connection between the lack of fathers and crime, I find interesting. I was sitting down thinking about my own son, and I mean, we teach our boys roles, whether these are formal lessons or not, and we teach them, among other things, we teach them when it's appropriate to employ violence. And we teach them, in most cases, we teach our sons that violence is not one of the first tools in the toolbox that you reach for. There are defined, limited instances where society as a whole and fathers in general will tell their boys that it's okay. Having boys, though, that don't get that lesson and don't get that reinforcement, you're suggesting that it results in out-of-control crime rates involving young men. So that's the challenge. If the father is not in the home, if the message doesn't come from the family unit, if the message is not coming from the community, how is that message introduced? This message of restraint, this conversation and lesson over violence when it's appropriate and when it's inappropriate.
Well, I think I'm a big fan of the Boy Scouts. I think they are a totally unjustly maligned group, and one that is just ignored. And there are other possible organizations out there, but they work to instill a code of valor and manliness and a belonging. And the inner city troops that I've attended just break your heart in the beauty of this effort to give kids a sense of aspiration and structure and looking up to their scoutmasters. So there are organizations out there that can, I think, work as a remote surrogate for paternal discipline. But again, I would emphasize it's not just the lack of, for any individual boy, that his father is not at home. And we've heard the sort of standard conceit that boys then growing up without a father will tend to gravitate, say, towards gangs where they can get that kind of surrogate male authority. But again, the problem is not just the boy doesn't have a father, but he's growing up in a world where marriage is not assumed. And this gets both to Kay's script and Roland's script, which is that all those moments of trying to think about how do I make myself attractive towards a woman, how am I going to be a breadwinner, and the support and nurturing that Roland talks about, they never have to think about that. And so the natural unruliness of males and the desire to live for the moment never gets restrained towards a future goal of marriageability. I would also add to Kay's point and your question about how do we start valorizing this, you know, this may seem just grotesquely naive, but we have changed some mores that are far less important, obviously, than marriage. But today, my gosh, how many campaigns are there against teen smoking? And this is a problem. I agree. Teen smoking is a bad thing. Ideally, we don't want teens to smoke. But I would argue that it is trivial in comparison. If you just want to talk about health risks, look at the rate of death by homicide among black males just is astronomically higher than death by lung cancer.
Heather, I'm sorry, but I have not been good with the time, so
Okay.
I'm going to have to break in at this
Public
moment.
campaigns. I would just argue we should have every subway in New York should, if they're going to have a teen smoking, have something valorizing fathers. I
Okay.
think we can start changing values that way.
Okay, let's start with some questions. You're up first.
My name is Velma Montoya, and I'm chair of the California Advisory Committee to the Commission. My question is for Heather and for Kay. What is currently financing this fatherless culture? Something's changed between the Moynihan Report and now. Professor Holzer suggests a big role for the Earned Income Tax Credit. And how would you modify these incentives?
Well, there are those who argue that it was welfare that financed the rise of single motherhood, and you know, there's something to that. But we had welfare reform, and some of us, and I include myself in this number, thought that maybe this would change marriage rates. It has not. The assumption was that women, once they found that they could not rely on government money, on public money, would look at men a little more carefully, the men that they've had children by, more carefully as potential providers. They did not do that. They did go to work on for themselves and did fairly well, at least on average. There are some problems still at the margins. But so the answer to that is, you know, we've had this enormous shift in the economy that Harry has referred to, which has made it possible for women to have opportunities out there that they never had before. And in some ways, a lot of the jobs that have opened up are more female-friendly than male-friendly. So, you know, that's part of what we're seeing now, I think, is that what's financing single motherhood now is the service economy.